So now that we're kind of running around better and I'm happier about the whole drivetrain and the way the car's running, I'm going to move on to a little bit of electrical work up here. So I noticed today I had intermittent, the turn signals were just working for a bit, but then they stopped working for a bit as well. So I think that I'm going to go ahead and replace the flasher unit on the car here, because I could actually put my hand on it and it was getting warm. I think I saw a fuse that had blown on the fuse block as well. That was for the direction signals. So I might have a stuck switch or something along those lines with the flasher. It's a $12 part, and as far as I can tell, it's the original one to the car. I'm gonna go ahead and it literally is just right here on the back of the fuse block. You just pull it out. It's a standard 3-prong. The tongue saw flasher, made in USA. So wow, who knows how old it is, but it'll be easy for me to go ahead and just get a new one rather than starting to go crazy on checking wires all over the place. I think the next thing I'm going to work on is the horns, because one horn works and the other doesn't, and it's supposed to be a 2-tone horn. So let's check out the wiring for it. So the next thing I'm going to work on is the horns, and here's both of them, and I believe this one is working and I believe this one is not operating. It's kind of, this is just by being close to it here, but I'm going to tap the horn button, and it just feels like it's only the left one there. So I'll probably do some low-level checking here, which is just simply making sure that these wires are, I mean, that's had a little bit of damage to it right there. That might be part of my problem, or some other type of short, something to go along here. I'm not sure what, but anyway, let's loosen that up there and clean up those contacts, and then we'll look on towards if there's something else going on. So I hooked up the voltmeter there to the working horn, and I'm going to push the horn and see if I can get contact to be made here. There it goes. I heard the contact. So there's 6 volts to the horn. So that's what it should look like for normal on a working horn. So I'll just disconnect this other wire over here, and we'll see if we get 6 volts at it as well. Find out if we have juice going to it. And here in this run, I've got it hooked up to the other wire and on the other horn there, and I can see that it's getting juice. So it's not a matter of a short in power getting to the other horn. So now we'll move on to the next steps. Alright, so we checked all the electrical connections as well over there, and I've sanded and cleaned those up, and it didn't make any difference. The horn still wasn't operating. So now I'm moving on to the next part of the manual, which is going to be removing the shell, which is crimped over at 4 points, and here they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll bend those tabs up and take the cap or the back off the horn. So I've got it disassembled, and it seems like a lot to take in at first, but I've checked over all the connections and they're all there. The important one, or a very important one, is that contact right there. This nut, which you screw up or down, changes the gap between these 2 contact points right here. And that's actually how you adjust the tone, is how large or small that gap is there. And I think there has to be a some kind of a contact at first between, the top and the bottom there to activate the electromagnet. These contact points look really rusty, so I'm going to put some rust remover and maybe run a little bit of sandpaper through there to try to freshen up the metal and maybe make better contact. Maybe that was my problem with why the horn wouldn't work. So let's try it out. So I kind of quick mocked it back up here. I've got my contact, and I suppose that since it's important that these mounts are actually pretty good too, because that's part of the grounding to the chassis. Those 1, 2 right there. And I ran some fine grit sandpaper through those contacts. I took that, put that nut back on there actually, and kind of cranked it down far enough that I could split those contacts apart to get the sandpaper in between there. So I did the top and the bottom, and went over here and pushed the horn in. We're back in business. And I think that that is by complete luck and miracle and what have you. That sounds a little bit lower than the other horn is over here, which is supposed to be the two-tone effect, with this one being the high and this one being the low. So I'm gonna, there's a lock nut that goes on right on top of that. That's the lock nut, and the one, sorry, I'm watching my own finger here. There's a lock nut on top, and then there's the adjusting nut right there. I'm gonna crank that nut down there, and let's see if we can't keep this working, and if so, I'll put the, disconnect it and put the cap back on it right here on the car and see how it goes. And here we are with both horns functioning at the same time. Cool. What a pleasing two-tone effect. I could just honk that horn all day. So now we're going to work on another part that was kind of important to me, which was the headlight switch, or the light switch to the car. We had headlights, we had brake lights, parking lights even, but we did not have instrument lights coming on, and or map lights, and those are also part of the headlight switch. So I had to do some work off camera here to kind of get to the switch and to get it out. I think what I'm going to do is it'll be easier for me to show this on the bench, but for the short term, just know that you to get to the knob off, you pull it out, and just like a piece of common plumbing, there's an Allen head set screw on every one of these knobs. So you back that out, and the entire knob just can come off, and you're left with a considerably long shaft that it slides down on. And over that shaft is a nut that keeps the entire switch, which is on the inside, it keeps the entire switch attached to the dash. There are a lot of wire connections that are on there, and I've already numbered those wire connections and labeled them. You can see one of them right down here. I think there was like, oh my gosh, 9. Some of them were double lugged, meaning like some of the lugs on the switch actually are used for 2 wires. But I've got the switch out. I'm going to put it on the bench, and then I'll show you some of the other parts to it. And it'll just be easier to do it there. And then I can also run through how the switch works and what you can expect off of it. And I'll just do it that way. So here's the original switch out of the car. I've gone ahead and reattached the knob to it and the Allen head screw in there, just to make it easier for people to look at, I guess. This little guy here was the booger. It's a nut that is actually comes down over that entire shaft and then screws right into that orifice right there. So on one side you have the switch, one side of the dash you have this switch component. On the other side you have this nut sandwiching it together, and the entire switch just hangs out in space, if you will, with different connections on it. And this nut did not go easy. You can't get on it unless you have almost a specialty tool, and I'll show you that we made. We tried putting like some long needle nose pliers down into the hole, because remember that all this is down deep inside that hole, so you can't just get to it with a screwdriver. So for this guy, there's actually, they have called a special tool in the shop manual to get to it. I can show you one that failed that we made. I should say Grant and we took a piece of aluminum pipe that we could slide down over this shaft and put a couple of teeth on it, but aluminum is too weak. That nut was on there too tight. We kept twisting off the teeth on it with it, so I even made a wooden one, which was even weaker than the aluminum one, so that was a complete failure. And then I wound up doing, which I thought I was going to wind up having to do, is sacrificing I have extra sockets, whole extra socket sets. And so Grant did a super job here of filing off the end of the socket to create a couple of teeth that could engage, slide down over the shaft and grab onto those, get down into that slot. And with that, we were able to twist it and loosen it. And once it went effortlessly. It was just in there tight from however long it had been in there. I don't know if the switch has ever been out or not. But with this nut loosened and then taken all the way out, of course this knob was already off, then that was left the entire switch on the inside free. Of course it was also connected with all kinds of different wires. And I did mark, or I should say I drew a map of the switch and then numbered the map, and then I numbered every wire that came off of it. And actually the manual also has a very good diagram here of that switch. And you could see it right here that tells you the proper orientation of the wires that are supposed to go on there. Now, of course, if you were to just take all the wires off erratically, then you wouldn't know. You'd have to rediscover which wire goes to where. So I recommend numbering them. So the problem that I was seeing was twofold. I could tell by the time I got under there that the instrument and clock lug, which is that one there, and the map light, they were not connected. There was nothing there. So no matter what I was doing with the instrument lights, because I'd actually replaced some lights, replaced some bulbs, and I had actually put a wire on one of these lugs here, which are always hot. Right here, those two guys right there, they're actually always hot. I originally thought that my switch was broken because my lights stayed on, but it turns out I just wasn't looking at, it was hard to see underneath the dash there, but I was connecting to the wrong lugs. So it has to be those two for the map light and for the instrument and clock. Neither of them were hooked up, so it was a kind of a fool's errand. And I've actually seen the wire that goes to the instruments has been cut and is just kind of dangling there loose inside. And the map was not even connected. So it may have been disconnected by someone doing some restoration work and just not put back together, or maybe they weren't sure what to do, but I've got this sorted out. And now we're going to go take a more in-depth look at this switch here. Okay, so I've hooked up a 6-volt battery to one of the lugs here that gets power, and all of these lugs over here are all connected to the same piece of metal. And if you touch to it here, you can see I've got 6.3 volts. Interestingly enough, this strip of metal right here that I'm touching to is a circuit breaker. So if there was to apparently get too much current going through this, it'll be hard to show, but if you look right in between there, see that? That's almost like a set of contact points. If it got too hot, apparently this would begin to vibrate and buzz and to kind of break the circuit up a little bit. So that would be your clue that you had a pretty nasty short going on somewhere. But anyway, back to the switch. So right now, this knob is pushed all the way into the switch, which is in the off position. So though we have power to these lugs here, it is not being transmitted to this first lug, which is the parking light lug. The second one here, not really getting power, is the tail and license. The fourth lug here is for headlights. And these two little guys up here are map and instruments. So nothing. That's in the first position, or pushed all the way in, off, basically. So I'm going to pull this out to the first position. So when you pull it into the first position, that's the parking position. Parking lights should come on, tail lights and license lights, at least at the first, I'm going to say untwisted position. So let's go ahead and go through that. So I wanted to confirm the switch is working, and as you can see, I've got first one here is parking. Second lug here is tail and license. That would be working. However, this one, which is headlights, would not be working. Now, I don't know if I can show this very well while holding the camera, but there's quite a bit of complexity going on inside of here. You can see that this lug, when it's hot, carries power all the way to this porcelain fixture here, which has a rotating contact plate here. So as you rotate this knob, and it doesn't go easy, it hasn't started to move yet, but you can almost hear it when it goes. Did you hear that? So there's different contacts on here being bridged depending on how this spins around. And that wire that you're seeing, that circular wire there, is like a rheostat. So it's intended to be able to also, as you spin this knob further, it's hard to do it one-handed because it's a tight switch, but there's another position. You can turn on the map and instrument lights if you do that. And then there's also another position here being pulled out. Hold on. Just listen to the clip, believe me. There. I've pulled that knob out further, and that is the driving position. So that will be, parking lots should be turned off. Put the fluke meter out there for us, sorry everybody. So parking meter is now not getting any power. Tail and license is, and it's also continuing to feed power to this porcelain component right here. And here are headlights now getting power. And if this knob here is rotated all the way to the left, these will be dead, no power for your map and your instrument lights. And as you twist it to the right, you twist a contact plate down in there, and you begin to either have map only or instrument and clock only, etc. So, and again, these last two lugs here are, for whatever reason, I'm not sure if they were just part of a future engineering or maybe used on different models, but these are always hot, no matter which position it is in. And I'll probably tape those off with some electrical tape once I put it back into the car. You could run some other accessories off of it. Could have been for, I don't know, maybe it could have been for a convertible top, or I just don't know. I'm not sure what it was used for, but they are there. I will tape those off, and those won't be used. So the good news is that this switch works. I need to do a little derusting with some evaporust on some of these contacts. I am not going to dip this switch entirely or dunk it in a bucket of evaporust. There's a gel type evaporust that you can put very specifically on parts. There's a pretty nastily rusted little spring there that puts pressure on those contact plates, and you can kind of see the green oxide that's built up on some of those contacts. The switch is a little bit stiff. The other thing I should pass on to everyone here is if you go to buy a replacement switch, like literally I was on Advance Auto and it said, if you look up a 1950 Buick Roadmaster, here is an exact replacement switch that will work on the car. Yes, you can buy a switch, and is it an exact fit? No. Every website that I went to, every online retailer, every store had a switch that would probably screw up and you could make, work into the dash. But the stem on them was way, way, way too short. We're talking all the way only that long altogether. And as you saw, the hole that this has to go into, it takes a considerable length stem, to clear out to here practically, to work in the dash of the Buick. None of them have as many singly isolated contact points. You could still make it work. I mean, by double lugging a few of them. They all have a park. They all have a headlight. They all have at least one dash light or one auxiliary, and at least one hot lug that you could either double or triple lug, try to draw power to. But none of them, I never saw anywhere on the internet, anything that had this number of isolated lugs. I mean, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 lugs that you can get onto this switch. So, yeah, if this switch didn't work, I was actually contemplating having to try to take it apart if possible and fix it. But I think I'm just fortunate right now that all I'm going to need to do is clean up some rust, hook up the correct wires to it, and I should be back in business with the interior lights if I can get the runs of wire routed correctly and not shorting out anywhere. So, good news. Let's get this switch back into the car, get it wired up, and see if we can't make some lights go in the car. And then I'll do the last part, which is finding out which bulbs are out and what else I need to replace there. And here we are now with our light switch installed, and the way that it's supposed to work, and it does, as you pull it out to the first notch, that does your parking lights. Unfortunately, right now I've only got my tail lights lighting up. I do believe there's supposed to be some front lights as well, but we'll work on that. And then, of course, pulling out all the way turns on headlights. But the part that was missing before and that I wanted to get to was the interior lights here. So the first twist to the right turns on the map lights only. That's what's actually, hold on. Yeah, okay, there's map lights only. That's the first. Oh boy. Not focusing very well, are we? Anyway, so those are map lights. Then the next switch is the interior light and map light. One more after that is just the interiors, with different levels of dim as you keep going to the right. So here's one more to the right that's a little dimmer. One more to the right, a little more dim yet. One more to the right, very dim. And then all the way to the right is off. Going to the left, a little less dim, brighter, brighter, brighter. Map lights and cluster. Left again, just map lights. Finally, all the way to the left is back to no interior lights again. And it always works the same, even when the lights are on, it's the same thing. One click to the right is supposed to be, I thought it was supposed to be just map light, yeah, just map light. Right again, both, and then different levels of dim. And all the way back. So we now have interior lights, and as soon as I get my new flash stat from the mail when it comes in, then we'll have turn signals.